But first, up in Brisbane this week, the Royal Commission into the former government's Robodebt scheme's been taking place. Now, you remember the scheme was a debt recovery program, automatically issuing notices to welfare recipients through an income averaging process. It dogged the former Morrison government, with taxpayers being forced to pay $1.2 billion in compensation to people wronged by the scheme. And now one of the ministers responsible for it, Queensland Liberal Stuart Robert, has admitted under oath that he'd received advice telling him the scheme was unlawful, yet he persisted anyway. Joining me now, Chris Merritt, Legal Affairs contributor at The Australian and Vice President of the Rule of Law Institute of Australia. Chris, thank you. I don't want an issue as serious as this just to, blow past on a Friday afternoon. There were comments made in that deposition from Stuart Robert. He talked about the Westminster system. He talked about cabinet solidarity, are reasons why he couldn't be honest with the cabinet or honest with taxpayers about this system. Have a listen.
Ministers are required to defend the government's programs as part of cabinet solidarity, regardless if they agree with them or not.
Now, you and I both know cabinet solidarity is if there's a decision taken in the room, even if you don't agree with it, collectively you leave the room and every minister backs it in. That's not cabinet solidarity to turn a blind eye to illegalities in his portfolio. He's got a positive duty to the Parliament and the cabinet and the law more broadly, doesn't he? If there is problems in his portfolio, if they've crossed a line of illegality, to fess up in the cabinet room or anywhere, to fess up about it and fix it.
I tend to agree. Look, the reality is, that the caveat is this: there's contested evidence before the Royal Commission, but I don't think that really matters. When you look at the substance, Mr. Robert has admitted publicly that he had massive personal misgivings about this project. If those misgivings were as serious as we're now led to believe, the correct thing to do under the Westminster Convention is to resign from Cabinet so that he could publicly criticise those matters. Now, this is what happened when Malcolm Fraser resigned from John Gorton's cabinet in 1971. And it's also what happened when Andrew Peacock resigned from Malcolm Fraser's cabinet in 1981, 10 years later. They waited until those resignations took effect before they were able to go out publicly and say what was wrong. Now, massive personal misgivings, I think, would be enough to trigger that. That's far more about, we're talking unlawful conduct here. A suspicion, even if it's a suspicion of unlawful conduct, should have been enough for him to act on that convention. You've got to think about it. Malcolm Fraser resigned because he suspected or he accused the Prime Minister at the time, Mr. Gorton, of disloyalty. Now, unlawful conduct is a little bit more serious, or suspicion of unlawful conduct is a little bit more suspicious. And the same goes with Andrew Peacock. He resigned because he accused Malcolm Fraser of centralising power. Again, I think that falls well short of what we now know happened in the Robodebt affair. So I tend to agree with you, Peter. I think Mr. Robert has a problem.
I want to pick up the point about cabinet solidarity. He's misusing that term. I think we've made that point. The point you're making there about a minister resigning being responsible to the Westminster system, because the Westminster system is about responsible government. It's about two things, actually: representative government and responsible government. And that's where I think the responsible part, he's hiding behind the term. We all think, oh, Westminster system, he's doing the right thing. In fact, he's not. And your point there about the Fraser experience, there was also one in recent times, if you remember rightly, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Christian Porter and Malcolm Turnbull, in the throes of that issue that Malcolm Turnbull then lost the party room support as Prime Minister, Turnbull asked Porter for advice about going to the Governor-General, remember that? And Porter offered his resignation because he disagreed with the Prime Minister. Again, that's responsible government. That's not what Stuart Robert's playing here.
Yeah, look, it's easy to throw around the terms, but when you look at the Cabinet Handbook, and I had a look at it today, the current edition, and it's got Mark Dreyfus's signature at the front with Mr Albanese's signature as well. Those provisions are pretty clear, no misleading, but if you're a member of Cabinet, you must defend decisions of Cabinet. Now, the argument about what Mr Robert did, and the Royal Commissioner picked him up on this point a little bit, it's about how far you go in defending a Cabinet decision. Do you simply play a straight bat, which is, I think, what Commissioner Holmes was trying to get at, or do you go one step further and actively mislead? And I wouldn't want to predict the outcome of the Commission, but I think that's where she's
Hang on, Chris,
leaning.
but you can only defend what's lawful. You can only defend what's lawful.
True, I agree. So on both points, whether he should have resigned and whether he still stayed within those the guidelines for ministers, I think he's in deep trouble.
All right, just before we go, a great column today. This Indigenous voice to the Parliament, you're saying not maybe an Australian idea, but of African background. Tell us more.
Well, that's how it looks. Well, it's not how it looks, it's how it is. The core of the Uluru Statement is its assertion that about sovereignty, that sovereignty is a spiritual concept, and that idea is it took off. It's been presented to the Pope. It's been endorsed by the Labor Party. It's being taught in some schools. But when you look at it, where did this come from? It didn't come out of Uluru originally. It came out of a judgment of the International Court of Justice that was put forward by the representative of the Republic of Zaire. Now, that judgment of the International Court was then, it found its way to Australia and was picked up and reproduced in the Mabo judgment of 1992. And if you look at the words of the Uluru Statement, and then you go back and have a look at the words of that 1975 judgment of the International Court of Justice, they're almost word for word. The things that are different are terms like a man have been removed and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have been inserted. Now, what does that mean? It means that the Uluru Statement, which is the source of the current agenda for a voice to Parliament and other things, has basically been imported into this country. Now, that doesn't mean to say that it's terribly flawed, but it's not a homegrown project, and it would have been very nice for schools, for example, to be told that this concept is an African concept. It's an idea dreamt up by a very clever jurist from Zaire in relation to residents of Western Sahara. It had nothing to do with Indigenous people. It's simply been plugged in and imported.
Chris Merritt, you do your homework. I think this is going to be a talking point next week. Thank you for being on the show tonight.
Quite okay.